mean? So anything which is related to your course in general coordination part, scheduling part, your issues, the interaction with the teachers, or any or everything for which you need assistance, I am the one who is going to be the responsible. Fine. So those, first of all, I welcome to the those who have joined the batch for 4th July. I welcome you all to Shubhra Ranjan IAS. I wish you all the very best, and today I'll just mention few IDs so that if you face any problem in future, you have the right point of contact. Fine. So for general issues, you'll always mail at gs@shubhraranjan.com. If you are online student, that is tablet course student, then if there is any issue in the tablet, then you will call you can call on this IVR number, or you can write the mail at support@shubhraranjan.com. Here I am talking about technical part. ठीक है, अगर कोई टेक्निकल इशू है तो आप इस पॉइंट ऑफ कॉन्टैक्ट को एड्रेस करेंगे. अगर अगेन इट इज रिलेटेड टू कोऑर्डिनेशन, यू वांट टू डिस्कस टू मेंटर, यू will discuss it separately. Fine. So one mentor will be assigned to your batch. So from today onwards, Saurabh Kaushik sir is going to be the mentor of your batch. He is going to help you for your general preparation, your strategy, the resources, how you can improve your test performance, and so on. So to contact him, first of all, he will be here in the institute. Okay, so 2 p.m. to 4:30, that is going to be your batch timing. So before the class and after the class is the time when you can expect him here. Fine. So to bring any concern to him, you can mail at gsmentor@shubhraranjan.com. And at last, this is my email ID, shubhanshu.j@instituteforhumanities.com. ठीक है. तो कोई भी आपको कंसर्न होता है तो बस आपको आइडेंटिफाई करना है कि वो आपको कैसे सॉल्व कराना है. इफ यू वांट टू कंसल्ट आवर आईटी टीम, इफ देयर इज एनी टेक्निकल इशू, you have to go to this. If you have to discuss anything related to your strategy, your overall performance, and so something like that, you can contact here. If you have to discuss anything related to the overall course coordination, scheduling, like he asked a very good question, that when you can expect the course to get over. Now for that part, I can be the right person. These people don't know when the course will end. Mentor doesn't know to a very great extent. Fine. So I'll make sure that mentor is informed. Fine. So as you know, today we are going to start modern history by Jayesh Khadra sir. So you will be getting the timetable on your Telegram channel. So I hope you all have received the welcome mail and you are already added in the Telegram group. Link has been shared to you. Cool. So इसके बाद एक आपको अलग से it is kind of unofficial. It is going to be a group. उसमें भी ऐड किया जाएगा टेलीग्राम पे. So the purpose is if there is any issue for which you are not able to write the mail, ठीक है, या एक इन जनरल आपको एक आंसर ही लिख के दिखाना हो मेंटोर को, तो आप उधर भी कर सकते हो. फाइन. बट हाँ, इफ यू वांट टू डील इट वेरी रिस्पॉन्सिबली, देन ऑलवेज मेल. ठीक है. सो दिस इज व्हाट you have to keep in mind, the right point of contact throughout the course. Yes.
So, local test series offer a weekly test or
class test. Yes. फर्स्ट वीक टेस्ट नहीं होगा, बिकॉज हम क्या करते हैं, जैसे सपोज इस वीक जो टेस्ट है वीक 1, वीक 2, तो आपको जो इस वीक पढ़ाया जाएगा उसका टेस्ट यहाँ पे होता है संडे को. ठीक है. तो कमिंग संडे यू विल नॉट हैव एनी टेस्ट बिकॉज एनीवेज यू विल हैव 3 to 4 क्लास. थर्सडेज टुडे, फ्राइडे, सैटरडे, 3 क्लासेस में कोई टेस्ट नहीं होगा. आज तो सर वैसे भी आपको टाइमलाइन बताएंगे. ठीक है. तो लेक्चर तो कल से स्टार्ट होगा, तो यू कैन एक्सपेक्ट फर्स्ट टेस्ट ऑन नेक्स्ट संडे. ठीक है. It will be in both online and offline mode. It's up to you. If you want to come to the center, take the test paper, write it if it is main, and अगर ऑब्जेक्टिव है तो OMR फिल करके आप इधर देना चाहते हो ऐसे कर सकते हो. अदरवाइज आप वेबसाइट पे भी कर सकते हो. What we recommend is if you are offline student, come to the center and do it. Depends on the mode. You have to check the टी रिसीट, उसमें आपका मोड लिखा होगा, बिकॉज द कोर्स इज अवेलेबल इन 3 मोड्स, हाइब्रिड, ऑफलाइन, ऑनलाइन। तो आप किस मोड में है वो आपको चेक करना होगा। हाइब्रिड में है तो आपको मिलेगा, अगर आप ओनली क्लासरूम में है तो आपको नहीं है वो, ठीक है। ये जनरली चीजें आप लोगों को क्लियर है? कोई और चीज जो आपको पूछने का मन हो? आई होप आपको सिलेबस पता है, पीवाईक्यू पता है, ठीक है। सो लेट्स स्टार्ट दिस जर्नी। आई विश यू ऑल द वेरी बेस्ट। आपको कभी भी कोई भी प्रॉब्लम हो, यू प्लीज फील फ्री टू मेंशन, ठीक है। चलो, ऑल द वेरी बेस्ट।
Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. Now, it's a relatively pleasant afternoon by Delhi standards. In Delhi, there's always a competition. Are the people more rough or the weather more rough? Is the weather more rough? There's always a competition. Okay, so what we're going to do is we'll start a discussion on modern Indian history today. And I'll probably give you a snapshot of what all things we're going to do today first, and then how we're going to go in the subsequent lectures. Now, when we talk about modern Indian history, the first thing that we will do today is you may have a lot of questions about which books to read, how to make notes and all of that. We'll come to some of those questions today, but a bit later. But what I want to pay more time and attention to is on more substantive issues, where we'll first talk briefly about the history syllabus. Once we have talked, so let me just first quickly talk to you about the syllabus, and then we'll specifically jump to the modern Indian history bit. Now, so from today and for the subsequent lectures, we'll focus on modern India. But before we jump to modern India, let me just give you a certain snapshot about history. See, from your examination point of view, history is there both in GS, in prelims as well as in mains. Now, if you take a look at the syllabus, my first suggestion to all of you is, please don't worry about which books to read. Just don't worry. Okay? Or don't try and go to the market and buy some books, or aap ye khareed lo, wo khareed lo. Don't get into all of that. Just go and buy the last 5 years mains question paper and buy the last 10 years prelims question paper. And if they're solved, that's also fine. So by the 5 years mains, you don't need them solved. The 10 years prelims, if that is with an explanation, jo bhi aapko sahi lage, whichever publication you buy, but buy. And for the coming week, and also one thing that you should do is get hold of the syllabus. Jo mains ka syllabus hai, take a printout and go through it. In the beginning of your preparation, the first 2-3 months are often the more difficult ones because you have to figure out everything, right? A lot of times people also spend a lot of time thinking about newspapers and current affairs and making notes of newspapers. And a lot of this is time wasted. That you will realize if you wasted your time for 2-3 months already. If you're not and you don't intend to, I will probably be pointing out some of the few things that initially you should not be doing, which are very obvious instinctive reactions that we feel compelled towards doing. कि हाँ न्यूज़पेपर के नोट्स बना लेते हैं, डे वाइज नोट्स बनाए, टॉपिक वाइज बनाए, प्रीलिम्स के बनाए, मेंस के बनाए, whatever. Just don't do anything right now. First, do these things. Get the syllabus and get the 10 years question paper for prelims and 5 years for mains. How to use them, all of that we'll discuss. Now, in terms of prelims, you'll find that in the history section, the syllabus includes ancient Indian history and art and culture. There is medieval and there is modern. Now, all these things also come in the mains examination, but at the same point of time, there are two other things. One is world history and the other is post-independence history. They only come in mains. So mains is this plus this. Now, if you see, for example, this year in the prelims examination, there was less questions from history. There were roughly 11 questions from history this year. Last year, there were some 17, 18 questions. Before that, there were some 16 questions. So you'll find that this keeps varying. On an average, you can say that out of the 100 questions in prelims examination, on an average, give or take, 1 year it may be 12 questions, and next year it may be 16 questions or whatever. It's 15 questions on an average. In the prelims examination, you can say somewhere around 15% of the questions in the prelims would come from history. Now, it's both, once you'll see the history syllabus, you'll realize that in no other area where in your GS syllabus, one subject has so many divisions. For example, in geography, you may have a division between world geography and Indian geography, or human geography and physical geography. Maximum 3 or 4 divisions. Here, you easily have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and 6 divisions. So, at the outset, the thing with history is that the syllabus, I would say, is really broad in scope. Now, though it is broad in scope, it's a bit of a challenge because it's broad, so you'll have to spend some time covering all these areas. But though this is somewhat of a challenge, the advantage is that the syllabus doesn't change. Once you've done it properly, you really don't need to worry about some major updation. Unlikely that you are going to live in that moment of history that such a big change happens like the discovery of something like the Harappan civilization. The Harappan civilization was discovered roughly around 100 years ago in 1922. Okay, that changed the course of our understanding of history. So unlikely that you will be preparing in a phase where suddenly something major excavation happens and will change our understanding of history. So really don't need to worry too much about some updation and all those things. Doesn't happen mostly. It may happen more in subjects like economics and polity and international relations, but not here, right? So it's an advantage if you've done it properly. If you revise 3-4 times properly, then your subject is rock solid. Don't need to worry much about any change. So that's an advantage. Partly the disadvantage is that the syllabus is a bit more broader. Okay. Now, if you see, as you approach preparing for civil services, why I was telling you, you should get the previous year's papers, is that you will understand the weightage of every area, both in prelims and mains. Depending on the weightage of every area, you must have a different approach for preparing history. Meaning there is no one common approach for preparing the whole of history also. There's a very different approach for preparing world history, and there's a very different approach for preparing modern Indian history. And the approach is governed by how many questions it gives in the exam, not by how much interest it generates in you. Some people have this approach also in preparing. This is very interesting. I will study this to great depths. But if questions are very few which are asked from that area, at least from the exam point of view, it doesn't make sense. For your own internal satisfaction, you may keep reading whatever and keep fooling yourself you're preparing for the exam, but you are not. So preparing for the exam requires you to be always mindful. Before you read anything, ask the question, how is it relevant for the exam, where it can be asked or where it can be applied. You are not shying away from studying. You are very watchful of how much time you give to which area. This is what they mean by strategy, right? You always keep hearing, right? Success is not just about hard work, but also about smart work. What is smart? A smart fellow will first look at the previous year papers, try to arrive at some understanding of the weightage of different areas, and depending on the weightage would give time to different areas. Is that point clear? Now let me just first tell you briefly about the weightage. If you look, you will find that roughly out of, say, if I was to say an average of 15 questions, out of these 15 questions, roughly 5 to 6 questions on an average in a year would come from modern India. Some 3 to 4 would come from ancient. Some 2 to 3 questions would come from art and culture, and some 1 to 2 questions may come from medieval. By the way, there is no guarantee. It can keep changing as well. Okay, I'll tell you, up till 5-6 years ago, out of 15 questions, 8, 9, 10 questions also at times would come from modern India. So students had the habit that in name of history, they only studied modern India. Now that has changed. There are more questions coming from ancient and art and culture as well. So if you put together, ancient and art and culture would also give you almost the same questions, or at times even more than modern India, right? Now, when you look in the mains paper, then in your GS paper 1, out of 250 marks, on an average, your GS paper 1 is divided into 3 areas. One is geography, the other is social issues, and the third is history. And give or take, roughly, all have roughly equal weightage. Roughly, it's all 80 marks, equal weightage. Now, out of these, in the mains, you will find that, say, 1 or 2 questions may come from modern India, or sorry, 2 to 3 questions may come from modern India. Say around 2 questions may come from ancient India and mixing it with art and culture. Okay. Another 1 or 2 or even 0 questions may come from world history. And say 1 question may come from post-independence history. So you will find that 3 to 5, 6, 7, 8 questions are roughly distributed like this. What I'm trying to tell you is, what is the examiner doing? You have to understand something about the pattern. Up till 12 years ago, you'll be like, sir, you talked 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 12 years ago. Why? Because you should understand the shift. Up till 10 or 12 years ago, UPSC used to give GS questions which were 30 markers and 60 markers. Okay, and you had choice also. You could choose which to answer. Now, they were long questions also, and they give the examinee the choice, which question they want to answer. Now, the moment you're given a choice, it's always a very difficult choice, frankly. It's difficult because it's like you all have been to university, and if the examiner asks you in a viva, 1 question, you don't know. 2 questions, you don't know. 3rd question, examiner asks, what have you studied? You say, I have studied something, whatever. Indus Valley Civilization, say. Then the examiner asks, okay, then I'll ask from Indus Valley Civilization. So you have been given the choice to tell what you have studied. Then you would say, I have studied Indus Valley Civilization. Examiner asks you the question on Indus Valley Civilization and you don't know. Then you are preparing yourself for a 0, because the examiner gave you choice. And then you exercise the choice saying, I have studied this, and then you are not able to answer from that. So it used to be a bit more tricky back then, also because answers were more lengthy. 30 markers or 60 markers. For example, a 30 or a 60 marker would easily have to be written in 6-7 pages, which is not the case anymore. Now UPSC has changed the pattern. What is happening? You have 10 markers or 12 marker questions. There is no choice. In the mains examination, there is no choice. Every paper roughly has 20 questions. There is no choice. You are expected to attend all the 20 questions. Now, the good thing is you really don't have to think about choosing. Okay. And if you know, great. If you don't know, bad luck, whatever. Now, what you should be looking at this here, however, what the examiner is doing is, given that the moment you have no choice to choose, it implies two things. A, you cannot afford to leave any area. Meaning, you cannot say, suppose you had a choice. One question was from ancient history, the other was from modern India. And you had studied modern India. So you attempted the modern Indian question. And you could attempt it because you had choice. Now there is no choice. Questions from ancient India, you know, you don't know, get lost. It's as simple as that. So the not availability of choice also means that what the examiner has also done is that the moment you are going from 30 mark questions and 60 mark questions to 10 and 12 and 15 mark questions, you are increasing the number of questions you are asking. You are giving no choice. What it gives to the examiner is the opportunity A to ask more questions. More questions means he can cover more part of the syllabus. And secondly, by not giving you any choice, the examiner is taking away that opportunity from you where you could have ignored one area and still manage to clear the exam. So the increasing number of questions and no choice means, in a nutshell, that the examiner can ask more questions, and which also means that you cannot ignore a subsection. I can tell you, if you talk to anybody who cleared this exam in 2012-13, they'll be like, what history? We just studied spectrum and history sorted. Right? Now, if you tell them to do the prelims paper now also, they will not be able to solve even 1/3 of those questions. Why? In the history section, I'm saying. Why? Because the pattern is changed. And more importantly, they are not giving you any choice. And if the number of questions have also increased. That's why I keep saying you need to actually analyze the pattern as well. Now, if this much is clear, why did I tell you this? Is for a reason. What you'll see here, what have I written? What the examiner has done, that if I just have 15 questions to ask, how can I frame those 15 questions in prelims in a manner that a student is forced to study all areas? Do you see? The examiner's job is not to make this exam easy for you. This is not neat. This is not neat, where 100 students or 200 students or 1000 students, everybody is scoring full marks. Right? So, the examiner's job is to make only 100 questions in a year. Out of that, history only 14-15 questions. The challenge for the examiner is how in 15 questions I can test whether the student knows something about Indus also, something about Ashoka also, something about Cholas also, something about Vijayanagar also, something about, Quit India movement also. So in those 15 questions, I want to see, has the student touched every area? It's not your university exam that there are 10 questions, most important topics पढ़ लो और question वहीं से आएगा. Neither the examiner's dharma is to give you passing marks, nor your act of writing every questions will get you selected, right? So why I'm not saying things to intimidate you, this, that. I'm telling you a very realistic picture so that you get a sense of what is the demand of the examination and then eventually prepare accordingly. Now, if you see, even in the mains section, you will see that this is a kind of a breakup. But there's something interesting also that I want you to understand. Weightage. All areas don't still have an equal weightage. For example, in modern, you will find that something to the tune, its weightage has, you could say, decreased a bit, but still it will give you 5 to 6 questions here in the prelims and some around 2 or even 3 questions in the mains. Still, if the maximum number of questions, if they come from any area, it is modern. 3 in the mains and 5, 6 in the prelims. Now it means that you should be giving more weightage to modern. If you look at a subject like world history, it will give you either 1 question or 2 questions or even 0 questions, and that too only in the main. There have been years where world history for 2 years did not give any question. Okay, so there are areas which have less weightage and there are areas which have more weightage, but there are no areas which have no weightage. I hope this point I am able to drill down very clearly. You may be very tempted to consider, sir, एक ही तो question आ रहा world history से, छोड़ देते. There's only 1 question coming from world history, leave it. Now please understand, if you keep doing this at the mains level, you are destined to not get selected. See, let me give you a measure of, and I'm not saying things to, scare you or anything. You may be like, the one thing I need to be told is, I need only 1 seat, or there's only, the examination may have 800 seats or 8,000 seats or 8 lakh seats. It doesn't matter. I need only 1 seat. This is nonsense. This is called lack of application of critical thinking. This is what happens when you do sasta motivation. It is a competition where you need 1 seat and so many others, people also need 1 seat. How can everybody have? This is what happens when we don't think, don't analyze and just consume things at face value, because it has been said on YouTube and it has been said with confidence. And God forbid, if the person is good looking, accepted at face value, whatever is said. No. So what you have to understand is that this is an exam and it is a competitive exam, and yes, while the degree of competition also means it decides something. The degree of competition decides the margin for error. This is what it determines. Suppose there are 1,000 people giving the exam, or suppose 1 lakh people are giving the exam and 800 seats are there. There is a certain margin of error. But suppose 10 lakh people are giving the exam and it's the same 800 seats, then the margin of error is definitely very less. How many people write the mains exam? Roughly right now 10,000 people would write. I'm just talking about people who write the mains, not the prelims. Out of these 10,000 people, roughly around 2,500 people are called for the interview. 800 make it to the final list. So 1 out of every 4 guys or person who writes the mains examination goes through. With all sincerity, people who normally go towards the main stage of writing, they're all fairly serious candidates, right? They may come from a pool of roughly around 3 lakh people who may write the exam and many lakh more who may fill the form, right? So there is less margin of error in the prelims also. But by the mains, it's no longer a competition between what? Less serious students, somewhat serious students and serious students. The main stage is where the competition is directly between the serious guys, whoever they are. Again, I'm not saying people who don't qualify prelims are not serious. Many people in our education system evaluate the worth of a student only by whether they have cracked an exam or not. I'm not saying that. I'm only saying people who qualify the prelims are serious candidates. I'm not saying the opposite. The opposite is people who don't qualify prelims are not serious. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that these 10,000 folks are serious. Everybody has studied what? Modern Indian history. If a question will come on modern Indian history, every serious candidate will write an answer. And one would expect will write a reasonable degree of answer with some reasonable degree of accuracy. But out of these four, the one who is read, that question will make a difference. The margin of error reduces in the mains examination. It is still somewhat you have in prelims. You have 100 questions at times. What happens? Please understand what is the difference between prelims and mains. Prelims is an examination where you just have to cross cutoff. Right? You just have to cross the cutoff. So even if you get 98 out of 200 or 99 out of 200 or 130 out of 200, it doesn't determine your rank. It is only a qualifying exam. But the moment you are entering mains, it now becomes no longer a threshold. Every mark counts and every question counts. Now, why am I telling you this? That please understand that you cannot afford to leave anything at the mains level, even if it is a 10 marker question. Okay, so get above this approach that okay, in history I will leave world history. In geography I will leave something on human geography. In science and technology I will leave something on cyber technology or cyber warfare. And in every area there is some area which may give either one question or no question. I'll keep leaving. In the end, in every paper you will keep leaving questions which others would have attempted, and you're out of the race. It's as simple as that. Right? So you can't afford to leave area. But that doesn't mean that you give the same amount of time and effort to cover all areas. For example, why I'm taking world history as an example, or even say post-independence history as an example, students often ask me, sir, which book to read on world history or post-independence history? And I say, don't read any book on what? World history and post-independence history. Because the weightage is less. What you should be doing, for example, world history, we complete in roughly around 12, 13 or 14 lectures. So for world history, you just stick to your lecture notes and that's it. And pray that the question comes from here. What you have done a basic degree of study on world history, like covering major topics like American Revolution, French Revolution, Russian Revolution, World War I, World War II, Cold War, something about Napoleon when you're talking about, and something about Germany when you're talking about World War I, II, and hope that the question comes from here. Because what is your guess? That look, I've studied the topic, I've studied my lecture notes, I've covered all the major topics. If there is a decent question, a straightforward question which comes from world history, I should be able to answer it. You left world history, they asked a very basic question on French Revolution. You were not able to answer it, and your friend who just studied notes is able to answer it, and you are in a problem. Right? So what I'm trying to tell you is that you have to cover certain areas not by books but by just notes. When it comes to another area, for example, a thing like ancient Indian history or a thing like modern Indian history, I would say that you cover your lecture notes, you cover some whatever material which has been given to you, and also you cover some standard text. Cover the standard text because the weightage demands so. It should be, this is how you should decode the syllabus, and whether it is for history, whether it is for polity, whether it is for whatever area, you should be able to pick and choose for which subject you need to read a book, for which class notes are enough. And then come up with your approach, because you have to understand that the syllabus is very broad and you have to revise a lot. So given that context, you have to be selective. I hope this basic context is clear why I was telling you have the syllabus and the previous year papers. Okay. Now we'll discuss more about modern India, and books and all I'll discuss later. But the first thing that I want to discuss with you and what we're going to do today is to take a brief overview of modern Indian history, okay, or an overview of what is the syllabus and how the Indian freedom struggle evolved. Consider this as a trailer of the picture that we're going to see for the next coming days. Okay, it's a brief background. Okay, this is very useful, especially if you have no understanding, which is fairly common because our education system prepares us for nothing. Okay, so there's absolutely, and I would want to start with an anecdote, which I can tell you from my own preparation journey. This is back in 2007 and 8 when I was preparing. It was my first class. The first class was an economy class, and the professor is a brilliant guy. He was from Delhi School of Economics. Very, very good professor. Okay. And I had no background in economics like whatsoever. I did not even understand the E of economics. So he came in the class, he started discussing that he said that the lecture title was about LPG and LPG reforms. And he kept explaining that LPG reforms are very good for the Indian economy. It has boosted India's economic growth story. LPG reforms has, you know, led to a multiplication of growth opportunities in India. It will attract a lot of investments, and we are cutting down on subsidy, and it is a good thing for the economy. The fiscal deficit will improve. God knows what all things. And I came from a fairly good academic background, studying at some of good universities in India. And I was all filled and settled out that for 2.5 hours, the professor kept talking about LPG reforms, its use, its success, its failures, etc. And back then there was no, I did not have a smartphone. I could not check in the class. Hey, what is this that the professor is talking about? I went back home after 2.5 hours of class, did not talk to anybody after the class because I was too ashamed to ask, what is happening? I went back to my room, looked at the LPG cylinder, and I was amazed that this LPG has been such a big part of India's growth story, and I have absolutely no clue about it. It took me one full day to realize that it was talking about liberalization, privatization, and globalization. We all start from a zero. Some of you may be lucky enough to not even start from a zero, right? So what I'm trying to say is there's absolutely no problem if you don't know when the Marathas ruled, or when Shivaji established the Maratha Empire, or when Aurangzeb ruled. It doesn't matter. It will be a problem if you don't know it after a year, right? So there's absolutely no problem. If I can start from LPG, you can start from anywhere, right? So that is there. Now let's start from, and I still don't forget that incident because it was a very humbling experience for me, that I was sitting in a class not realizing for 2.5 hours what is the teacher talking about, right? And I used to consider myself smart, so that was humbling. Now what we are talking about as a background today is to cover the period, to give you a brief snapshot of the period from 1700 all the way up to 1947. Now when we talk about the 1700 to 1947 period, you'll see that we can divide this period into broadly roughly around 3 phases, 1700 to 1820, and you can write with me. The other, one could say, is from 1820s to almost up till the early 1900s. And the third we could say is from 1900s to 1947, or if I was to say more precisely, from 1917 to 1947. Now, this is the scope of the syllabus for modern Indian history, where these 250 years, the syllabus doesn't start from 1857, it starts almost more than 100 years before it. Okay. Now, from this period, there have been a lot of questions in prelims examination lately. And partly the reason is understandable why more questions have been asked from here, because students often ignore this area. It's an area which people don't pay a lot of attention on. Now, why am I dividing this whole 250 years into 3 phases? Not into 4, not into 5. Why 3? I'll explain in some time. But first understand that in this 1700 to 1820 period, and we'll talk about this, that one of the first key, what I am interested right now in covering are certain key trends that you will notice in this 100-year period. What the broad picture that you will see developing in this 100-year period. There are certain key trends you will notice. One would be that in 1707, and we'll talk about this later in more detail, one of the major Mughal emperors, Aurangzeb, died. So Aurangzeb's death, and this date is important. This date is important, 1707. Aurangzeb, one of the major Mughal emperor, died in 1707. And what we will see is that this, around this time, will begin the process of what is called as the decline of the Mughal Empire. A process of the decline of the Mughal Empire would what? Begin here. Now, what is this process of the decline of the Mughal Empire that we are referring to? Let me give you a broad context. See, and we'll discuss this in more detail later. I'm drawing a poor map just to explain. If you'll see, the Mughal Empire in 1707, roughly speaking. So, this was to be the roughly speaking extent of the Mughal Empire, extending from Peshawar in the northwest, almost up to Bengal in the east, and even up to Deccan in South India, into the Hyderabad, and even partly the Carnatic or the Madras regions as well. So in substantial parts, it is almost what we call as a pan-Indian empire. I'm saying almost because, for example, one area that we often forget is the northeast. Assam, neither Assam nor areas east of Assam are not a part of the Mughal Empire. There are certain portions here, there are certain portions here, there are portions here. This is the Baloch region. These all areas right now are out of our scope of the syllabus. See, we will not become experts of modern India. No claim to fame that we will rewrite the history of modern India, coming up with some unique insights. We are only going to get a decent enough understanding. So some of the areas were not a part of the Mughal Empire. So it is not a empire whose boundaries would correspond exactly with what we see today. But yes, fairly you will see it's almost a pan-Indian empire. Now, this almost pan-Indian empire existed in 1707 when Aurangzeb ruled. But Aurangzeb's death would soon result in a change. After Aurangzeb's death, we will see that this pan-Indian empire would undergo a change, And in its place, rather than one empire, you would find slowly but steadily the rise of a number of states. You would see slowly but steadily the rise of number of powerful states like Awadh, which would correspond with, say, the Uttar Pradesh region, Bengal, which would correspond with many of the regions of Bihar, Odisha, the modern day West Bengal region, as well as Bangladesh. You would see the state of Hyderabad, which would often correspond with the Telangana region. You would see the state of Karnataka, which would comprise of coastal parts of Tamil Nadu. Not the whole, the coastal parts of Tamil Nadu. The Mughal Empire after 1707 would start to break up. And a number of them, which I've just mentioned, would be ruled by ex-nobles of whom? Of the Mughal Empire. Ex-nobles of the Mughal Empire. Many of them went on to become governors and then independent rulers of many of these states. All these states as independent entities will be born between 1700 to 1800. New independent regional powers will be born. And there are some examples. But that's not all. You would have other examples as well. For example, one of such a prominent state would be the Marathas. Another such state, for example, would be the state of Mysore. Another such state, for example, would be in Punjab. So you'll find a number of other states also rising. These states will not be established by the nobles of Mughals. Okay, we'll see these states are established by those players who have nothing to do with the Mughal Empire. They were not previously rulers. These states will be established by rulers who were not a part of Mughals. What you will see that one pan-Indian empire will be now be replaced by a number of powerful regional players. This is the transition that we will study in more detail where in the 1700s. This is the first layer, okay, of change that you will witness where the process of decline of the Mughal Empire would be followed by the rise of a number of powerful regional states. But I'm saying this is one of the changes you will notice in the 1700s. But the story will get increasingly more complicated because not just there would be the rise of a number of powerful regional states, there would be the arrival, or one could say, if not arrival is the wrong word, one could say there would be, one would note a strong rising presence or a rising presence of major European trading companies or European companies who are looking to establish themselves when in the subcontinent, in the Indian subcontinent. For example, we'll see that the Portuguese, for example, that the French, for example, would be based out of a place called Pondicherry. The British, for example, would be based out of a place called Madras. Sorry, yes, I need more colors, less colors. Okay. So the British would be stationed out of a place called Madras. The British also would be stationed out of where? Calcutta. So the British would be stationed out of Calcutta. The British would be stationed out of Madras. The French will be stationed out of Pondicherry. The French will be in here also, in Bengal. I'm not writing those details. Because I don't want to overburden you initially. But you will also see that here, who? The Portuguese would be based out of Goa. The Dutch were also there in the region. But for example, the Dutch in the 1700s are primarily located in Sri Lanka. They are based out of Kerala also, but they are primarily located in Sri Lanka. So what do you see? Not just the Indian states are rising. There is a strong presence being felt of not just the British, but the British, the French, the Portuguese, and even the Dutch to a certain extent. So what you would see is that there is no limit of the number of political actors. All of a sudden, you see so many interested parties, right? All of these interested parties are there, right? So what you would see, by the way, what are the Europeans doing? What is the interest of different parties? We'll come to later. But you also see a significant rise in the European presence across major ports, the Portuguese, the British, the French, etc. So this is the second major change you'll be able to notice. Now, what is going to happen? In these 100 years, in these long 100 years, or in this century, one player will emerge. One player out of all of them will emerge and become so powerful that it will establish the next pan-Indian empire. And which is that entity? The entity which gave us English and cricket, meaning the British, right? So the cricket is primarily a colonial sport which is introduced by the British. So goes with the English language, right? So what we are going to study in this period is also about how eventually the British outsmarted everybody else. This is what we have to really study in the 1700s to the 1800s period. How the British defeated not just whom? Marathas, Mysore, Hyderabad, Bengal rulers, but how they also defeated the Portuguese, the French, the Dutch, etc. to become the next pan-Indian rulers when? Roughly after 1820, by 1820, that's why I've written this. Roughly by 1820, this will explain. Roughly by 1820, the British had managed to defeat whom? Awadh, Bengal, Hyderabad, Carnatic, Mysore, Marathas. Only ones left were Punjab. Punjab was defeated a bit later. But you will find that in all these areas, it was ultimately whom? The British, which one by one went on defeating many of these powerful regional states. So what you would see is this transition where a significant rise in the European presence across major ports was witnessed, and eventually a steady rise of the British East India Company's power and influence over the Indian subcontinent. Over the Indian subcontinent. A steady rise of British East India Company's power and influence over the Indian subcontinent. Okay, we'll see this in more detail later, but this is the broad trend. This is what we'll study from 1700s to 1800s. 1700s. Is this much clear? Yes. Now, what happens after 1820? So the general trend here is what? The decline of Mughals and eventually the rise of regional players and eventually the rise of the British. Yes. Now, we all suffer from one big fallacy in understanding history. And its significance we should understand, at least be humble enough to consider it. That we often assume that it was expected, widely expected, or it was most likely that out of all these players, the British will win, defeat everybody else and form the next pan-Indian empire. This was merely a possibility. It was not a surety. Where? In 1700s. Sitting in 1700, it was almost impossible for someone to predict that 100 years later, British will defeat everybody else and emerge as the next pan-Indian ruler. It was even difficult for somebody to predict whether there will be another pan-Indian ruler or not. Itihas mein, in the last, if I was to say 3000 years, there have been only 3 pan-Indian rulers. So, out of 3000 years, if there have been only 3 times when there have been pan-Indian rulers, it is quite much possible that there may not have emerged whom? A single pan-Indian ruler. देखिए, मैं आपको इस पॉइंट का सिग्निफिकेंस बताना चाहता हूं in the beginning itself. Only 3 times when I'm saying, सिर्फ 3 बार ही हुआ है. If you consider, for example, the Mauryans. Mauryans मतलब अशोका. जिसको नहीं पता कोई दिक्कत नहीं है. Right? Mauryans, Ashoka. Somewhere around, if I was to say, somewhere around some 250, 260 BC, the Mauryan Empire was a large empire. The Mauryan Empire was a large empire, and in this empire you would find again their rule would somewhere would have looked like this, somewhere stretching from Peshawar and Takshila and coming all the way up to portions of North India, Central India, even going to certain portions in South India. Ashoka also sent his son to Sri Lanka, and with that went Buddhism also to Sri Lanka and all those things. It was a relatively very large empire. After this, you won't find an empire of this size again almost for a long time. If I was to say somebody who really, would come in a big way, for example, were the Cholas. But they are not a pan-Indian empire. For example, they were ruling around 900 AD. And they are a power primarily based out of South India. But what they do is that not just the Cholas ruled over South India, they came to north also. Coming all the way up to Bengal. Coming up to the Ganga and up to Bengal. They also ruled over Sri Lanka. They also ruled over Malaysia indirectly and Indonesia indirectly. But they also did not establish a pan-Indian empire. The next sort of pan-Indian empire we see is whom? That also was reaching its peak between 1658 to 1707. Mughal Empire actually was existing from 1526 all the way technically up till 1857. But in reality, its peak is somewhere here. Okay. Now, what you would find is that the Mughals were a pan-Indian empire, and after them, whom? And after that, we can say sort of independent India. So you will find it is not always a very predictable phenomena that there will be a pan-Indian empire. many a large hundreds and hundreds years of have passed in between where there has been no pan-Indian empire. So nobody could say for surety that after Mughals there will be another pan-Indian empire or not. And if there will be, who will be heading that empire? It is very difficult to predict what will happen 100 years later. It is very difficult to predict what will happen tomorrow also. Okay. So we should not assume, and people and students often fundamentally commit this mistake. Everybody knew in 1700s that Mughals will be defeated and their place will be taken by British. In fact, at many points, it was a close contest between the British and the French. If the French would have won, it was possible that they could have ruled over portions of India. And then a portion of Indians would have been speaking French and playing football. It did not happen. Right? So don't take it as a given. That was always meant to happen. Right? Now, coming back here. Second phase. The second phase is from 20s to 1900s. This is a interesting phase again, because in this 1820s to the 1900 period, what you would see is, in this phase, what you would see is that 1820s, in fact, not just 1820s, even before that, that up till 1857, there was a constant struggle between the British East India Company and the British Crown. The British East India Company was a trading company. What it would do, it would buy goods from India and sell in Europe, Britain and other parts of Europe also. This East India Company was a private company. And it was in a constant tussle with whom? The British Crown. And this tussle was over whom? Over what? Over who will rule India. It may seem outrageous to you, but at a point of time, the company was trying to convince the Crown that Crown should not worry about administering India. Who will do it? The company. It's like Apple telling US, that the US government, that look, don't worry about this country. Leave it to us. We'll handle it. Okay. So there's a tussle between whom? The British East India Company and whom? The British Crown. Both parties are interested in ruling over India, because the one who rules will make even more profit and money. Okay. So, but ultimately there is the revolt of 1857, and after this the Crown said to whom? The company. I know this is going online. I hate online. But in the words of our esteemed Prime Minister, tumse na ho payega. Who's telling to whom? The Crown is telling to the company that the company cannot administer such a large territory like India. It doesn't have the competence. It doesn't have the ability. So the responsibility of administering India must go directly in the hands of the Crown. And it's time for company to pack up and leave. Okay. I know I'm oversimplifying right now, but that basic trend you should know, that after the revolt of 1857, what you would find is that the company's administrative powers would be stripped away, and the rule over India would pass into the hands of whom? The British Crown directly. It would pass into the hands of the British Crown directly. This is happening from 1857 onwards, meaning that from 1857 to 1947. Roughly for 90 years or so, the crown was directly in charge of ruling India. Okay, this would happen. There is also by 1885 the rise of early Indian nationalists. There is a rise of early Indian nationalists, and also there is the formation of one organization called Congress. Here is a word of caution. Congress was not the only organization formed. There were Indian nationalists who were active before 1885 also. ऐसा नहीं है 1885 one day Congress was formed and all of a sudden Indian nationalists were born out of nowhere. Indian nationalists were active in 1860s also, 70s also, and they had their own organizations also in different regions. But in 1885, many of them decided to come together to form one organization, which is a pan-Indian organization, or which is the organization which was formed in Bombay in 1885. That is the Indian National Congress. Please understand, this Congress has got nothing to do with today's Congress. Okay. This Congress would be an organization which will keep changing over time. The Congress of 1885 would not be like the Congress of 1905, would not be like the Congress of 1970 to the 1947 period. It will keep on changing. Okay, why? Because leaders will keep changing. Not just leaders, approach of Congress will keep changing. Meaning, approach meaning, at times Congress would think, should we cooperate with the government? Other times Congress would think, we should oppose the government. At times they would say, we should oppose them, but not do public protest. We should oppose them in the parliament. At other times they would say, we should oppose them publicly by launching protests and andolans on the street. One of the biggest andolan jivis, if I was to say so, was Gandhi. Gandhi's arrival on the scene of Indian Congress, Indian freedom struggle happens in this year, and we'll talk about 1970. And for the next 30 years, Gandhi is one of the primary protagonists who would launch a lot of public protests. On behalf of whom? Congress. But Congress is not doing any major public protest except a couple before 1970. But Congress has formed even. So what I'm trying to right now tell you is there is going to be a lot of change within Congress. So just because the name stays the same doesn't mean that the organization stays the same. Its goals would stay the same or its strategies would stay the same. It would keep on changing, and we are interested in that change, understanding that change. We will study that. Now this is about 1800s. What we are now, but the last phase is one which is also very important, and that is the phase 3, that is from 1900 to 1947. In this phase काफी क्वेश्चन आते हैं एग्जाम में from this particular phase. Okay. In this phase, we'll see a lot of things happening. For example, one thing that we would see is that there would be firstly certain major international events. One international event, one of the major international events would be World War I. Another major international event would be World War II. This is from 1914 to 18. This is from 1939 to 1945. And between them, there's another one called the Russian Revolution, which is in 1917-1918 period. Now, why am all of a sudden I'm talking about these international events? Because what is happening in India's freedom struggle is not merely a function of what is happening in India. It is very heavily influenced by what is happening outside India. For example, in World War I, let me just give you a simple example. Whoever fought against whom, we are not interested right now. But if I was to just say simply Britain and France, they are on one side, Germany, Austria-Hungary, or Germany, Austria-Hungary, Ottomans, yeah, Turkey. Ottoman was a bigger version of Turkey. For first class, that's enough. They are on one side. So there's war, and then the Americans are on this side, on Britain and France side, whatever. We don't need to remember who's on whose side. But in this 4-year war, who is India is on whose side? Britain's side. Because India is being ruled by Britain. And for fighting a war, one thing, especially a war of a large scale, a war which for the first time saw the use of the machine gun, for the first time saw the use of tanks, for the first time saw the killing of much larger number of people than ever seen before in history. What did you need to fight such a war? First, you needed more people or more soldiers, right? So in World War I, India, which was an important British colony, India supplied close to 1 million, or 1 million is roughly around 10 lakh troops to defend whose interest? British interest. This is a big event, and this big event will have a big impact on the Indian freedom struggle. For the first time, Indians would realize, and this is a good reminder for all of us also. There's a popular saying in international relations that says, just because you don't take interest in war doesn't mean the war will not take interest in you. This war had absolutely nothing to do with India's interest. We were not looking to grab any territories in Europe. Nor was this war being fought on Indian territory. This war was not fought to defend India's territory, nor was India looking to grab any territory. Yet 10 lakh Indians were fighting in this war. Not just these 10 lakh Indians were fighting in this war. Indians would also deal with inflation. You see the Ukraine war is going on right now. So that fighting between Russia and Ukraine, you may have read oil prices are increasing somewhere, food prices are increasing somewhere. So the world would deal with the consequences of wars, not just Russia and Ukraine. In this war, who's dealing with the consequences? Indians. And Indians are being indirectly sucked into the war. Why are we being sucked into the war? Because the British are ruling over India. Will that give fuel to India's resentment against the British rule? Obviously. Because we are now fighting somebody else's war that we have absolutely no interest in being involved in. And if this was happening in World War I, season 2 is always bigger than season 1. World War II saw an even bigger involvement of India, and in many more ways. Where? In World War II. By World War II, jab we'll study and we'll see later, we'll see Japan came almost up to India. Okay, for example, Andaman and Nicobar was occupied by Japan. India's only major battle that was fought in World War II on Indian territory was the Battle of Kohima, which was fought. Okay, Kohima is in Nagaland. Those who don't know, it's okay. We all begin somewhere. A survey done 7 years ago in India told that 75% Indian people don't know the capital of the 7 states of Northeast India. Okay. So what is absent from sight is also often absent from consciousness, especially if you have less Lok Sabha seats. Nothing more must be said. It's all on camera. Okay. So, but what you would find is that 39 to 45, 3 million Indian troops, 3 million Indian troops or 30 lakh Indian troops were involved. Again, fighting on whose interest? British interest. So, obviously, this will also fuel, it will also have a major impact on Indian nationalism. And it will also fuel some degree of resentment against whom? The British. Then there is whom? One event that we'll read little about in India, that is the Russian Revolution. The Indian Prime Minister is all set to visit Russia in the next week. Okay, and the Russian Revolution is a very, very important event in the history of the world in the 20th century. What is happening in Russia at this time, we are not interested too much right now, but very simply, the monarchy in Russia was overthrown. The Russian ruler was called the Tsar. He was a monarch, and this monarchy was overthrown in a violent rebellion in 1918. This ruler of Russia was killed, his whole family was killed, and the family was removed from power. In their place came what was called the party of Mr. Lenin. Lenin came to power in Russia, supported by his party, which they called was the party of workers. Workers meaning workers who would work in industries. So this party they called as the Communist Party. Okay. And they are saying that they are inspired by the ideas of another fellow Marx. Forget it. We are not interested. All they are saying is that we are a party of workers and we look to capture power. Where? In Russia, to begin with. This is happening all the way in Russia. Absolutely has nothing to do with India. But when this happens, and there's the Communist Party which is being formed in Russia, seeking inspiration from this activity in Russia, there are communist parties formed in Britain, in Germany, and in many other parts of the world, including in India. You have the Communist Party of India being born in 1920-21, which is also an impact of international event, that is the success of what is the Russian Revolution. Okay. Simply put, some people are saying that if workers and their unions can capture power in Russia, they can capture power anywhere. Okay. Now you will be like, why are we interested in this? Just because there's a party called the Communist Party formed in India. No. We are interested in this because in 1920s in India, almost every major Indian nationalist was inspired by, not all, almost many, especially young Indians, were inspired by this Russian Revolution. What they are saying is that our union or workers in India can overthrow whom? British rule. Okay, and we'll see this later also. You will have people like Bhagat Singh, you will have many other people who will also be inspired by these ideas. So what you would see is that the success of this revolution would inspire youth even in India. Now these are certain events. questions on this are framed in mains, prelims, all of that will come to later. But what I'm trying to tell you is whatever is happening in India in the 1900s is not happening in isolation. It is being influenced already by events happening outside India. Another major trend that you will see is that देखिए Gandhi is super important. Everything and anything on Gandhi you should know from your exam point of view. Everything from what books he wrote to what were his major political ideas to what major struggles he participated in. For example, Gandhi was born in 1869. He was born in 1869. Okay. Let me just tell you this. That Gandhi was born in roughly 1869, went to South Africa when he was roughly 22 years of age in 1892 as a lawyer. सबने नाम सुना होगा. Went to South Africa as a lawyer. नहीं सुना कोई दिक्कत नहीं. For the next 22 years, Gandhi stayed in South Africa, almost up till 1914. Gandhi stayed in South Africa. These 22 years are called as the South African years of Gandhi. After 1914, Gandhi came to India, and up till his assassination, he stayed in India, right? So what you see is after 1914, when Gandhi came to India, by the way, he was fairly old. Gandhi, once he comes back to India after 1914, he is already something around 44 years of age, 44, 45 years of age. Okay. But for the next 30 years, between 1917 to 1947, he was the most important. There's absolutely no doubt that he was the most. Just one second. He was absolutely the most important figure of the Indian freedom struggle. Okay. And what you should know is that these years are also often called the Gandhian years or the Gandhian phase of the Indian freedom struggle. It is Gandhi under whom you will see that between 1917 to 1947, there was a fresh what? There was a fresh rejuvenation of the Indian freedom struggle. Meaning he gave a new life to the Indian freedom struggle. How? Why? Which struggles was he a part of? What was his political ideas? What was his strategy? Which books he wrote? Which movements he participated in? Everything has been asked. Everything has been asked in some way or the other and will be asked again. Every year, at least out of your whole GS paper, which is what? Your 5, you have your 4 paper 1 to GS paper 1 to 4. GS paper 1 to 4, that is 1000 marks. And you have your 250 marks essay. Out of this 1250 marks, at least 250 marks questions without fail come from Gandhi. 250, Gandhi is a paper in himself. Without Gandhi, I don't know whether India would have attained freedom or not, that I don't know. It may have, because many other countries also attained freedom from British and French. Gandhi's contribution to Indian freedom struggle are many. India's independence from British is only one of them. Okay. So, what I'm saying is that whether Gandhi may or may not have, without India may or may not have attained freedom without Gandhi, but UPSC syllabus is never complete without Gandhi. Every paper, every subsection, they will ask questions on Gandhi. You look, that's why I'm saying, look at the past papers. Okay. For example, you will find questions in history. Obviously, everybody would expect to find questions on Gandhi and his contribution to the Indian freedom struggle. There have been questions, for example, comparing the views of Gandhi with Ambedkar. There have been questions on comparing the views of Gandhi with Subhash Chandra Bose. They have asked the question, how would have Indian freedom struggle shaped if Gandhi would not have been there? These questions I'm telling in the past 6, 7 years only. If Gandhi would not have been present. In GS paper 2, which is your polity, they will ask questions on Gandhian principles and the Indian constitution. In issues related to governance and corruption, also they've asked questions on Gandhi. In GS paper 3, in your economy, the principles of Gandhian economy or Gandhian economic principles and their relevance today. Are Gandhian principles relevant for environmental conservation? Environment is also a part of GS paper 2, GS paper 3. Questions have been asked. GS paper 4. Okay, sorry, one thing I forgot to tell you. In GS paper 1, there's also what? Social issues. So Gandhi is here also. Gandhi's views on caste, on women. GS paper 4. This paper is all, this GS paper which is ethics. Most students' answers in ethics paper, they start with Gandhi. Every question they only write Gandhi. Okay. But still, Gandhi is one of the most important figures here also. Every question, mostly people would. Some would try go beyond Gandhi and come to Ambedkar. Very few people go beyond this, but then there are many others. There's Buddhism, there's Jainism. There are many other principles which can also come into. Your essay paper, every year or every alternate year, at least one of the topics is a topic directly or indirectly related to non-violence or Gandhi. So what you will find is the more you study Gandhi, the more rewarding it is. Okay, it is a super important area. Questions repeatedly in prelims. I did not tell you prelims question, but prelims maybe repeated questions are asked. So Gandhi is definitely the most important thing that you can keep studying. Last major thing where in the 1900s that you should know is the role of not just Gandhi and Congress, but the role of many other players also who were neither Gandhian nor were with Congress. For example, we'll see what was the role of those who picked up arms against whom? Those who picked up arms against the British, the role of the militant nationalists. And you will see that throughout the 1900s, from 1904 to 1908 in Bengal and in Bombay province, there were a number of militant nationalists. Then in World War I also, a number of Indians picked up arms against whom? British. Then 1924 to 1930, you have people like Bhagat Singh, you have people like Chandrasekhar Azad, many others, like the Chittagong Armory raid and all that. There were who picked up arms against the British. And then in the 1940s, you have 1942 to 1945, you have the formation of what is called as the INA, the Indian National army or the Azad Hind Fauj, which had amongst some of its key leaders at Subhash Chandra Bose. So this is also an important part of the syllabus. So this is a broad, brief snapshot of all the things that we will cover. I've tried to give you a broad sense from 1700s, that is the decline of Mughals, to the rise of regional powers, to the rise of, amongst all these regional players, the rise of the British East India Company. All of that is witnessed by 1800s. Eventually, the East India Company is thrown out by whom? The British Crown. And 1857 onwards, the Crown takes over directly. By the 1900s, you see, Indian nationalists are finding their voice. And what gives them a fresh momentum of hope and energy is the arrival of Gandhi. And Gandhi's 30 years between 1917 to 1947 will have a big impact. But Gandhi and Congress were not the only voices in the Indian freedom struggle. You also had those who picked up arms against the British, like the militant nationalists. And neither Gandhi nor the Indians who picked up arms against the British, they were not acting isolated from what was happening in the world. In fact, World War I, II, and even the Russian Revolution had major impact. I've tried to give you a brief snapshot. Is this much clear? Everybody? Everybody is alive, awake. The afternoon session is not a great time for having class. I personally feel so. After lunch, you're like, bas, so jao. Now, I hope that this is making sense to you. One thing more that I wanted to talk in the beginning, and that is also a bit about strategy, is how you should go about doing history and what will be our approach when we'll do history. We'll start with the decline of Mughals as the first topic today. But before we do that, what should be your approach? Dekhiye, for every topic, I will dictate certain notes in the class. So your class notes is what should be something that you should make. Making class notes is useful. A, you will remain in the class. When you are writing, you are still awake. Mind and body, everything is in sync, you are here. Otherwise, you can get lost anywhere, right? Body may be here, mind may be anywhere. Now, that's one. Second thing is, why we are making class notes is for one reason, that when you are revising at a later stage, you should have everything at one place. Okay. So, there will be certain class notes, but I will also give you certain handouts. You should go through these handouts also. You will find certain additional points in the handouts. And those additional points, you can write on sticky notes and add it to your class notes. Okay. Just maybe just leave some space or put on a sticky note, add to your class note. Then will come the role of the book. Book has to be read at last, not first. Okay. Which book I'll come to. But what is the purpose of reading the book? You should be clear. We are not looking for additional information while reading the book. If we are not looking for additional information, then why are we reading the book? Valid question. Why to read? You were saying in the beginning of the lecture, badi baat, that read something only when there is some use directly that you can see for the exam. So why we are reading the book is that you will learn to express an idea only when you read a good text. Unless you read a good text, you will never learn to express an idea. Students often come back later saying, sir, I understood broadly, but it is difficult to write an answer. So please understand that writing an answer is a function of two things. One, whether you know the topic well, you've revised it at least 2-3 times, that's important. But revising it 2-3 times so is a must. Without it, it cannot happen. What? Writing a answer. If you think by reading once you can write an answer, you are mistaken. Nobody can write an answer by reading once. I am also told that there are many people who prepare for this exam and their interviews will come once they get selected. I did not prepare. I only read newspaper. There are some people who will get selected and then they'll say that I really did not prepare for the exam. All I did was I just used to come back from college and I used to read newspaper. This is called a jumla. You can say anything. I didn't prepare only. I did not read newspaper also. Just I used to go to college. My friends used to study. I used to just listen to them. Went to the exam and it happened. Who's going to? Especially if you have been selected, then you can say anything. Most people are sensible enough not to say these things. But some people are always there. And often this may receive a lot of attention. But if you go and read any good candidate selected blog, you will get to understand the struggle and the pain that they have gone through. Without naming anybody, if you see, there have been many toppers who may have been preparing since college days, right? In the first year, second year of college, or somebody may have started preparing after the college, whatever. There's a certain degree of struggle that everybody has to go through. And that struggle can begin in college, it can begin after college, but you can't really achieve it without struggle. Okay. And anybody who's saying that, no, I thought it was just, what can I do? I was just born with so much talent, right? That I just went and it happened. It's simply lying. Okay. So there is no shortcut. You have to read at least 3-4 times before you are able to write an answer. The second place where it helps a lot, I'm telling this, I'll again not name the name of the student, but there was this student, brilliant, got selected in some 22 years of age, 21, 22 years, passed out of college and got selected. Was a student here, the Pol Science student also, madam student. Brilliant student. When I was talking to him after selection, it did not seem to me that he is 22 years old. It seemed to me that he knows much more than a 22-year-old knows. And I'm not talking about exam. Every year people get selected. Okay. It's not like they're climbing the moon. Right? But very rarely you come across people who have not just qualified the exam but are simply extremely well read that you don't expect a 22-year-old to do. And he was a student of Stephen's College in Delhi and whatever. So he had a brilliant academic performance. But still, he was more brilliant than what a degree could tell. So I just asked him, when did you read so much? So he said, I had a very simple routine, sir, that I would go to college. After college, I would read every day some 3-4 hours. In the first year of my college, I was reading anything and everything that got my interest, not at all thinking about UPSC or anything. It is only, and he told me something very interesting which I have not seen in most people's case. He said, I spent 1 year, full 1 year, to just understand whether I should prepare for UPSC or not. For 1 year, he said, I only kept debating this idea that should I prepare for this exam or not. So I said, okay. How does a 18-year-old debate this idea? And it's interesting, right? How does a 18-year-old debate this idea? And how does he decide? He said, and I've never found any other candidate. I've seen many toppers. Every year somebody tops. You'll also see many toppers. I'm not saying that the one who has topped is not an able candidate. Is definitely a very able candidate. But this fellow told me that, sir, I picked up the biographies of senior bureaucrats who have retired from service to see what they did in their 30 years of service, to see whether it appeals to me or not. Then I will decide whether the exam is worthy of my time or not. Tangent ही अलग चल रहा है. Most of us decide our worth by what? This exam. That fellow is saying, I need to see whether the job offers me those opportunities to explore my potential, that I should give my time and effort and 2 to 3 years of my preparation to prepare for this exam or not. And to decide that I'm not talking to my uncle, who also happens to be a civil servant. Or my father. I've seen my father right from a young age. He was a civil servant. I also thought I'll become a civil servant. Surprise. Obviously, you will think if your father is a politician, you will also think like I can also become a politician. He's asking the question, why? And he said that is the process time. And I realized that okay, the job profile here can offer me many potential roles. At times I can serve at the district level. At times, other times I may serve in the agricultural department. At another time, I may serve in some other department. I may get the opportunity to explore many different roles in a lifetime, and no other job probably can offer me these many roles. So it's worth a try. He gave. After the exam, when he got selected, by the way, he got just 2 marks more than the cutoff in the prelims exam. Whatever was the cutoff, he just got 2 marks more. He got very good rank in mains and interview. He had some early 20s mein, all India rank, whatever. He went to Rajasthan, been a DM there or whatever. Now, but his example struck me as somebody. And then I asked him, did you plan that if you don't get selected, what will you do? He said, sir, it was my first attempt. I was planning to give it once more. He said, I was prepared that I may not get selected, but I was planning to give it another attempt, second attempt also. But he said that if I would not get selected, I was thinking that if I don't get selected in my second attempt, then I'll leave. I'll do something else. Okay. So again, we often think that successful people, they don't worry about not getting selected, or they don't worry about having a plan B. They also do. They're also humans. There's no problem in having a plan B. There's no problem in preparing for, a plan so that if you fail, what you do. And very, very important, knowing when to quit. You'll be like, sir, first class, supposed to win. You're talking about when to quit. Quitting, I'm saying, is not quitting from life. Some people like quit the exam as quit life. What I'm saying is, I'm indirectly trying to tell you, give 1 or 2 or 3 serious attempts. Don't give 6 attempts. If anybody is thinking, I will give 5 years to prepare for this exam, you are wasting your youth. Don't give 6 attempts. Give 1 or 2 or 3 serious attempts. Not everybody may have had an educational background in the past, which may have given the opportunity to them. So it is possible that that fellow may have taken 1 attempt, you may take 3. Okay, because maybe you did not have that resources in the past that that fellow had. So it's okay. But whatever attempts you give must not be a half-hearted attempt. You must not waste more than 2 to 3 years of your valuable youth for this exam. Happens, great. Doesn't happen, you may end up doing something even bigger. Jawaharlal Nehru never cleared the exam. His father wanted to. Jawaharlal Nehru's father, Motilal Nehru, wanted him to give the exam. Nehru didn't. Ended up becoming the Prime Minister. His father was Motilal Nehru, that's why he ended up. Because his father was a big guy, rich guy, senior member of the Congress. True. That's true. But still, life had something else in store. Subhash Chandra Bose cleared the exam, eventually did not join, whatever, ended up becoming a big person himself. Right? Better not to talk about the present, otherwise it will become problematic. All I'm saying is that don't worry and don't give 5 years of your life to this exam. Simple, honest rule. Do not give 5 years of your life to this exam. Sir, I have decided for 2 years I will first prepare on my own. Then after that, I will do class or test series and this and that. This is not a journey for your self-realization. You are not going to become Buddha by qualifying the exam. Buddha spent 12 years in the forest before he attained enlightenment. Won't happen here. Even if you qualify or even if you don't qualify. So be mindful, time is precious. Use it very properly and prepare with a killer instinct. Happens, great. Doesn't happen, maybe something better is in store. Now let's now go and start discussing from the first topic. I know if you're feeling that 2.5 hours is too much in the very first lecture, it's okay. It's okay in the sense that slowly you will build up the stamina to sit, listen, write. Right? So give the heading. Okay, sorry, book. Before we go to the next topic, book. Which book? Simple point. There are many books in the market. There is Spectrum that everybody apparently says that you should read. There is old NCRT. There is new NCRT. There is 6th to 10th NCRT. There is Plasi to Partition by Shekhar Bandyopadhyay. There is Ipsita Banerjee Dubey's book by On Modern India. There is Bipin Chandra, which is published by Penguin. This is India's Struggle Till Independence. And there are many other books. There's Sumit Sarkar, there is many other books. Apne ko nahi. We obviously are not going to read so many books. Whatever is relevant from all of these books, I have covered in the lectures. Whatever required selective portion, I'll give in the handouts. So you don't go running around books. Okay. But still you should read one text. And that text must be small and yet must be well written. And that is either the old NCRT for the 11th class or which is written by Bipin Chandra himself. And this is now being published, that old NCRT is now being published even by Orient Black Swan Publications by the name of Modern India. This is a 250-page book. You can read it. If it becomes too big, then you can't, right? Or if the language is extremely academic and very difficult, then also you can't. Okay. So it's a good book. It covers all the areas. It is well written, good language, academic language. It doesn't sound like a guidebook, and you can complete. So this is the book you should read. The old NCRT, or which is now being published by the Orient Black Swan. No need in modern India, no need in modern India to read. No need in modern India to read 6 to 10 NCRT. No need to read. Don't waste time. Okay. And whatever is relevant from Plasi to Partition is a very good book. But whatever is relevant, I have covered in the class. Don't try reading it unless you are an MA history student. There's no point. Okay. Unless you have a history optional, there's not really much point. So Ipsita Banerjee is also a good book. Whatever is relevant, I have covered. Bipin Chandra has another book called The India Struggle Till Independence. It's a 450-page book. It's very big. It's not needed. So whatever is relevant, there also come. Okay. You just read either this old NCRT or it is being published by Orient Black Swan as a separate book. Just this. Okay. This also you read only after what you have done in the class. Like, sir, you ignored the elephant in the room. Spectrum. Right? Spectrum सबसे ऊपर लिखा ना, सब यही बताया स्पेक्ट्रम पढ़ना है. Spectrum is a not so great book. It's a B.L. Grover S. Chand publication. और है सुमित सरकार, देखिए क्या है, it's a guidebook. It is not a, whatever I have written here, apart from everything else, are books. It's a guidebook. What it is copy paste. It's a copy paste from everywhere, and every year, whatever new question comes, they copy paste more, and it becomes thicker. It is the only book it is the only history book whose size has doubled in the last 10 years, and it keeps increasing as if new history is being added every year. Not a very useful book. Some portions of modern India, some portions of Spectrum's book are good compilation of facts, which may be useful in prelims examination. So, for example, its chapter on social reform has a good compilation of facts. There are some chapters which they have done a good job of compiling. Whatever is relevant, we'll give in the handouts in the class. So don't really need to end up reading Spectrum from cover to cover. There's only one book you should be considering reading, and that is Vipin Chandra. Selective things from Spectrum, if you want to read, you can read hardly 1 or 2 chapters. And even that I'll give you in the form of handouts in the class. That will come. Clear? That's about your book. And book you read only after you've done class notes. And one important thing I've not discussed that you should be doing is doing MCQs and then also answer writing. MCQs and answer writing. MCQs do a good thing. Ek to one thing that they prepare you is for prelims. That's one. The other thing that they help you with is it helps you partly identify the gap area. What maybe a subtopic you have missed. And you read the explanation, you'll also get some additional information. Answer writing, you know, before you start writing 5 answers or 10 answers in one go, you should start writing 1 or 2 answers. Slowly learn about answer writing. And how do you go about answer writing? So answer writing is also something that you should gradually start now. Last thing here, start for prelims and mains in an integrated manner. Don't first do prelims and then mains. There is no such strategy, right? Prelims and mains, because after prelims there is hardly any time to separately prepare for mains. And anyways, there is no medal that you will achieve by only clearing prelims. Nobody will remember, right? You will also not remember. You may remember, but that doesn't matter. I wrote prelims and cleared prelims all time. It doesn't help really anywhere. Answer writing, you can start when you'll be given assignments here. You start writing answer, and slowly I'll talk about history answer writing. I'll myself will give you some questions and will tell you that if we were to write an answer, this is how I would write an answer. So you'll slowly get a sense about answer writing. Clear? Anything else? Clear. Okay. So now let's quickly start with the decline of Mughals. Give this as a first heading. Okay. Now, in terms of decline of Mughals, the first thing that we need to understand in this topic is, and this I will do with every topic that we'll do, we are going to here cover the period from 1700 to almost 1739. In this topic, we'll read a couple of things. One, we'll try to understand the administrative structure of the later Mughal Empire. The administrative structure of what? The later Mughal Empire. What is later Mughal? Everything after the death of Aurangzeb is later Mughal. Why? I'll explain later. Okay. But administrative structure of the later Mughal Empire. causes of decline of the Mughals, consequences of decline of Mughal, and some of the key events here. Key events associated with the decline. Some of the key events associated with the decline. Now, questions in your prelims examination are asked from this administrative structure of the later Mughal Empire and some of the key events. Whereas questions in your mains examination are asked more from the causes and the consequences of the decline of Mughal. One question came in the mains examination, and this is in 2018 or 2019, I think. 2019 question was this, that 18th century India, देखिए 18th century is 1700s. 18th century India was a period of fragmented polity. Discuss. This was a 10-mark question which came in your mains exam. Something about 18th century India was a period of fragmented polity or fragmented political structure. One and the same thing. Discuss. So, this was one question which has been asked. Prelims mein, they've asked questions on Jagirdari system, which is a part of the administrative structure here, because we'll study of the administrative structure. We'll talk about Jagirdari system, and many other points here are there. They have been asked before also in your prelims exam. Before you read any topic, you should know what has been asked from that topic and which areas to focus on. If you know that, you will know what to focus on, and you'll not get lost in who was whose son, who was whose grandson, who ruled when, who ruled when. Okay. Nobody is going to ask you, arrange Bahadur Shah, Jahandar Shah, Farrukh Siyar and Muhammad Shah Rangila in the order in which they ruled. I will tell you the order, but I am still telling you, most likely they will never ask you this, because that's not a very significant event, or in the sense it did not have any major significant consequences. Okay, so that's why don't worry too much about names and facts. Whatever name and fact and year you need to remember, I'll tell you. Only that you must remember. Let's start with a brief background today. And don't buy books. I'm telling you right now, don't buy unnecessarily large number of books going to the market because your neighbor says so, because the senior says so, or whatever. Be slow. Okay. For example, I'll tell you today, I normally in a month buy 8 to 10 books at least. Why? Just like that. Because I don't have to prepare for any exam. I may not even read out of a 200-page book, I may only read 30 pages and leave it. I'll read it later. My reading style and your reading style are very different because the demands are very different. Your reading style must be very selective and only read as much as is required. Don't focus on every other nonsense. There is no dearth of what? Availability of free stuff in the market. Earlier, pre-internet generation, you had to go to a photocopy shop to buy the pirated stuff. Now it is available freely on Telegram. This notes, that notes, everybody's notes are freely available. What do you do with so much information? If earlier was an era, up till 2007 and 8, was an era of information scarcity, now is an era of information overload. right? So you are dealing with a different kind of a problem. Don't suffer from it, with others are going to suffer, right? Be selective, right? Now, in a brief background, let's first talk about a brief background of the Mughals. If you see, a map of the Mughals, you will find that the foundation of the Mughal Empire was, and there's a very simple rule: whatever I'll write on the board is important. I don't know how and when it will be asked. Either has been asked or will be asked. It can be asked in your UPSC exam. It can be asked in your state PSC exam. God knows whichever exam. Yeah. I'll dictate. But I'll dictate, but despite when I'm not dictating. That's why I'm saying when I dictate, I'll dictate. But when I'm not dictating what I'm writing, that is also important. Okay. Because there may be certain things that I may tell you and I will write, which you may think, अरे ये कौन पूछेगा, and you may end up finding कि ये पूछा गया है. Okay. I can't keep saying after every line कि ये भी पूछा गया है, ये भी पूछा गया है. Okay. If I'm writing, it is important. Okay. If I'm writing or if I'm dictating, it is important. 1526, it is Babur who laid the foundation of the Mughal Empire. And Babur came from where? He came from Afghanistan. Right? He came from Afghanistan. And then when 1526 Babur is coming from Afghanistan, he is not a native of Afghanistan. He is coming from Central Asia. In his early part of his life, Babur, coming from Central Asia, first established his rule in Afghanistan, and from Afghanistan eventually crossed a very important pass, which pass is called as the Khyber Pass. This Khyber Pass sits where? It sits in a mountain chain called as what? The Hindu Kush Mountains. It sits in a mountain chain called the Hindu Kush Mountains. If you don't know, it's okay. Eventually, you'll figure out everything. These mountains eventually merge with other mountains in Central Asia, Hindu Kush Mountains. So, what you have to understand that an army can never cross a mountain by climbing up and down the mountain. It will take too much time, energy, resources. What they look for is a gap in the mountain, which is called the pass. So, it is through the Khyber Pass that Babur's army came. And this, located in this Khyber Pass, is an important city. Which city is it? The city that I've been mentioning again and again is Peshawar. So, Peshawar is located at the mouth of the Khyber Pass. It's practically located in the Khyber Pass. So, coming through the Khyber Pass and Peshawar, Babur's army would cross the Punjab region and would come all the way up to Delhi. When the Delhi rulers were Ibrahim Lodhi or the Lodhi dynasty. So, you find that in 1526, Babur defeated whom? The Lodhi rulers in what is called as the first battle of Panipat. Babur fought the Lodhi rulers, particularly Ibrahim Lodhi, in the first battle of Panipat. Babur's army was a very relatively smaller army. Lodhi's army, Ibrahim Lodhi's army, was at least 2 to 3 times bigger than Babur's army. Okay? And Babur was able to defeat, I am not discussing medieval India, right? I'm just telling you a brief pointer. Babur's army was a small army. It was able to defeat the much bigger Lodhi army because Babur's army used, apart from other things, also used the gunpowder and used these gunpowders along with as a part of cannons or top. It is Babur who's using gunpowder and cannons on a large scale in the first battle of Panipat, and Lodhi's army had never faced a cannon before. War fighting before cannons was about troops and horses and horsemen and archery. Okay, so combat did not see before this the use of cannons on any large scale. Where? In North India. I'm not saying, always be careful of what I'm not saying. I'm not saying India. We sitting in North India always believe everything which happens in North India is happening for the first time in India. Because we have 80 Lok Sabha seats in Uttar Pradesh. As simple as this. The use, what I'm telling you is important. The use of the gunpowder and cannons for the first time was done by Babur's army in India. It's a false statement. Before Babur and the Mughals also, the Deccan rulers, there were, for example, the Bahmani rulers. Who are Bahmanis and all that, we are not going in, right? Oh, medieval ka part. But the Bahmani rulers were one of the first ones to use what? To use the cannon and the gunpowder. Who was not? Babur. But in North India, the first one to use was Babur. Okay. So, and this is the first time in North India you would find it. They are using it against Ibrahim Lodhi's army, and Lodhi's army is simply caught amazed. They have never seen such a technology in the battlefield, and they lose out to whom? Babur. Who wins? Babur. The Lodhi era comes to an end. You have Lodhi garden here. Okay, Delhi में तो आधी history तो North India, Delhi you will find, right? So the Lodhi era comes to an end. Babur lays the foundation of the Mughal Empire. Now, once Babur lays the foundation of the Mughal Empire in 1526, but he dies by 1530, and in his place comes his son Humayun. We are not going to discuss anything about Humayun right now because that's not our focus. We want to focus on 1700. I am just telling you the background. ये सब आप medieval में पढ़िए, Humayun and everything. After Babur died, after Humayun died in 1556, and after Humayun came Akbar. Akbar came to power. After Humayun's death, Akbar comes to power. But Akbar is merely 13 years of age when he comes to power. He is in no position to rule. He is a kid to begin with. And when a 13-year-old kid comes to power, then it is an opportunity for others within the Mughals to capture power from this kid. Let's put it this way. So what is happening is that there is a power struggle within the Mughals. That can they seize power from Akbar, who is a young prince, will not be able to rule. So there was an attempt to overthrow whom? Akbar. And this led to what was the second battle of Panipat. And you would find that there was an attempt by Hemu. He was one of the military commanders in the Mughal Empire itself. And what this military commander wants to do was to remove Akbar and become the ruler. But Akbar is supported by his senior military commander, who was loyal also, was Bairam Khan. And Akbar is not really fighting in the second battle. It is on his behalf who? Baram Khan, who's fighting, and Hemu's attempt to overthrow Akbar was defeated or was suppressed in which? In the second battle of Panipat. That's in 1556. Yes. Okay, 1556. 30 years after first battle. First battle date you need to remember. Okay, these dates you need to remember: 1526, and then 30 years later, 1556. First battle 1526, second battle 1556. Coming now not to the third battle, coming to what happens after this. Akbar was able to stabilize his rule after 1556, and for the next 50 years up till 1607 roughly, Akbar ruled. Where? In the Mughal Empire. But it is actually under Akbar that a major expansion of the Mughal Empire would be witnessed in North and what? Central India. And even, for example, a working relationship with the Rajputs would be established. Relationship with whom? With the Rajputs. What do I mean by working relationship with Rajputs and all? We'll discuss later. Okay. But what is Akbar doing? He is ruling for how many years? 50 years. Practically, a big expansion of the Mughal Empire is happening first under Akbar. And where will you see this? You would see this here. That the grandson of Babur was the one under whom you see there would be a major expansion in all these areas. The Mughal Empire would start looking something like this. This would be under whom? Akbar. North and Central India. The Mughal Empire right now is not a pan-Indian empire. But the 50 years of Akbar rule gave a solid grounding to the Mughals. Because Babur, who had initially won the battle, died merely 4 years after that. He did not have the time to actually strengthen, expand or consolidate the Mughal Empire. It was done by whom? Akbar. That's why Akbar's rule is considered as Akbar is considered as one of the first major Mughal rulers who ruled for a considerable period of time. 50 years, it's a long time, right? Now, 50 years, who has a job experience of 50 years these days? 50 years is a long time. Yes. You may even forget when you were not a king. If you rule for 50 years, you may like, ऐसा तो कभी था ही नहीं that I was not the king. Now, what is happening after this is important. After Akbar's death, there comes other rulers, Jahangir and Shah Jahan. Again, not interested. We are not discussing. And this goes on up till 1656. Firstly, there is Jahangir, then there is Shah Jahan. Shah Jahan was the ruler in 1656. Shah Jahan was the ruler in 1656, and when he is the ruler, you see in 1656, after 1656 comes to power whom? Aurangzeb. And Aurangzeb was also the one who ruled for another 50 years. So, just one second, this is an important. So, from 1656 all the way for 50 years up till 1707, you see it is Aurangzeb's rule. Now, there's something that I want to tell you here, that in terms of Shah Jahan's sons, there were four sons of Shah Jahan. Okay. Now, out of these four sons of Shah Jahan, the one who became the ruler was Aurangzeb. See, the Mughals had no clear rules of succession. There was no such rule that the eldest son has to become the king. Often, at least in theory, it was said that let the most able son become the king. Meaning, there is no such thing that the eldest has to become the king. So, there would often be a struggle at times between the sons as to who could become the king. And now many of you may be thinking, Arey, how come brothers and brothers are fighting to become the king? Firstly, not everybody was a son from the same mother. Could have number of wives. But even that is possible. If I was not to say names today, but a couple of decades ago, there was a fight between two brothers who wanted to take over the legacy of their father. This was the tussle within India's biggest business house. Much said, let something be left unsaid. Ultimately, after the death of the father, it was the mother who was worried that the two sons may end up fighting too much. You know who I am talking about. If you don't know, okay, nothing to worry. Coming back here, Aurangzeb's, why am I telling you this useless story, is for a reason. That Shah Jahan's four sons, out of this, Shah Jahan's eldest son was Dara Shikoh. He was also not just the eldest, he was also the one who was the closest to whom? Shah Jahan, and Shah Jahan wanted him to be the king. Okay. But Aurangzeb obviously also wanted to be the king. So what did he do? He killed all the three other brothers. Simple. Solved the problem. Kill all three of them, including whom? Dara Shikoh. And he beheaded Dara Shikoh and buried him in, and took the head to the father and was like, it's done. I am the king. And he also imprisoned the sitting Mughal emperor Shah Jahan. So Shah Jahan was imprisoned, Dara Shikoh was killed, all the other brothers were killed, and you see, the man has arrived who's won the game of thrones. Right. So it's bloody, it's ruthless. That is how capture of power and a transfer of power is happening. So killing brothers to capture power was not unique amongst Mughals. It would happen amongst every other set of rulers. But one thing which was unique that Aurangzeb did was that he imprisoned his father, who was a sitting Mughal emperor. That was unique. There's a significance of this, I'll explain later. There's a further difference between Dara Shikoh and Aurangzeb, is that Dara Shikoh, for example, is considered to be an individual who took a keen interest in a number of religious ideas and theologies of all religions. For example, about the Upanishads, about Mahabharata, Ramayana, all of that also, Dara Shikoh took a lot of interest in, translated many of these texts into Persian, and he was a very well versed individual in many of these aspects, which was not the case, for example, with Aurangzeb for that matter. But whatever. Why am I telling you this? Because of two reasons. A, I'll give you some brief separate facts about Dara Shikoh. They can be asked in the prelims exam. Why I'm saying they can be asked in the prelims exam? Because the government of India is looking for the grave of Dara Shikoh. It has been searching for the grave of Dara Shikoh. Aurangzeb buried Dara Shikoh in Humayun's tomb. This is Humayun's tomb. In Humayun's tomb, more than 20 other later Mughals are buried. Aurangzeb buried Dara Shikoh also there. He is buried there, but most of those graves are unnamed graves. So the government is looking for the exact, trying to identify the grave of Dara Shikoh. Whatever. It tells you the government is looking for something, it might as well as be important. Right? Many other Mughals were buried. Why are they only looking for Dara Shikoh? Right? Because many of the works that Dara Shikoh translated, etc., are very important. Okay. So that's there. Now, what I was also trying to indirectly tell you about Aurangzeb's rise was that by the time he came to power, one thing was, a message was clearly sent. That if Aurangzeb could do this to his brothers, anybody who tried to challenge his authority would meet a similar consequence. He was not a weak ruler, and others should think 10 times before rebelling against him. Okay. So this is also an indirect message that Aurangzeb is trying to send. In the next 50 years of Aurangzeb's rule, we would see a major territorial expansion of the Mughal Empire in in the Deccan region, where Aurangzeb would defeat three major powers in the Deccan region. One would be Marathas, Bijapur, and Golconda. Marathas, Bijapur, and Golconda. What is this that we are discussing? This is actually happening between 1660s to 1690s. 30 years between 1660s to 1690s. You would see what would happen is that Aurangzeb would expand the Mughal Empire into this region, where south of the Narmada. Narmada is an important river जो central और south India को divide करती है. Okay, Narmada, which runs through Madhya Pradesh all the way into Gujarat. Going south of the Narmada into the Deccan region, you will see that whether it was Marathas, whether it was Bijapur, whether it was Golcondas, all these three powers were largely subdued. Bijapur and Golconda were eliminated. Marathas were reduced to a very small size by 1690s. By whom? Aurangzeb. So what Aurangzeb does is that he is the one who is expanding the Mughal Empire into what we call as the Deccan region. And you will see, thus the Mughal Empire would extend into all these areas and would reach its peak. Akbar and Aurangzeb both are considered major Mughal rulers. Both ruled for roughly 50 years. Both ruled at a distance of roughly 50 years. Right? So that's one of the ways to remember that I also use. So 1707 is the death of Aurangzeb, and when Aurangzeb dies, it is after this that you will see. It is after the death of Aurangzeb that the decline of the Mughal Empire will begin. But here is a question. Why are we studying the causes of decline of Mughal? You may say, Arey sir, what is there to study? Aurangzeb died, Mughal Empire declined. But if empires would only rise and decline because one ruler will die, then all history can be explained as the history of what? A ruler came to power, so empire rose. Ruler died, empire died. But you will find I'm not saying that's an incorrect explanation. I'm saying it's a very limited explanation. It's only one of the factors. For example, the British Empire ruled over India. Many rulers came and went in the British Empire. USA is today the world's biggest power. Not just today, but since the last 30 years, USA has been the world's biggest power. Everybody agrees. You may say China is a rising power, this, that, etc. Somebody who's been fed too much on WhatsApp would say, no, India is. Baki sab side up to hum. Okay. But if USA is the world's biggest military and economic power today, but not just today, at least since the collapse of the Soviet Union after 1990 to now, you are sitting in 2024, a good 40 years, a good 35 years. In these 35 years, how many US presidents have come and gone? Many. You had George W. Bush. Before that, you had Bill Clinton. Before you had Bush Sr. After Bill Clinton, you had George W. Bush. After George W. Bush, you had Barack Obama for 2 terms. After Barack Obama, you had Trump. Now you have Biden. And somebody else may also come after him. But just because a ruler comes to power or goes out of power, empires don't rise and decline. There are other bigger factors at play also. So Aurangzeb's death will contribute to the decline of Mughal, but it is not the only reason the Mughals would decline, and it is not the only biggest reason also. We'll see what are the factors are there tomorrow's class. I've done enough to test your patience on the first day. Well done, you have survived. So tomorrow we'll complete this topic tomorrow, decline of Mughals. And we'll give you a handout as well on the decline of Mughals tomorrow. Thank you.